Okay, today we'll be starting chapter 1. Here's all the learning targets we'll be focusing on here today. All right, we'll be identifying variables in a statistical study, distinguishing between quantitative and qualitative variables. Very shortly we'll be doing that. Identify populations and samples, distinguish between parameters and statistics, and comparing descriptive and inferential statistics. There's one in the textbook that we are excluding. Determine the level of measurement. It doesn't really come up throughout the year, and it's not really that important, so that's the one that we will be skipping in 1.1, okay? All right, so it's very conceptual based in chapter 1. All right, a lot of concepts and reading, so I need you to just pause the video and read pages 4 and 5, fill in the definitions, and then we will have a discussion to follow. Okay, so the first term we saw was statistics. And basically, this is statistics in a nutshell. You collect data, you analyze it, and then you use that to draw conclusions. Let me take a simple exit poll as an example. From the last election, they would collect data from people who left the polls. They would analyze it. Why? To make conclusions about the population. That's stats. Okay? So by now, you probably have these filled in. Individuals are the people or objects included in the study. It doesn't have to be people. Okay, it could be guinea pigs. All right, it could be the diameter of tree trunks, or individuals might be tree trunks of oak trees. All right, and then now what are you measuring on those individuals? If it's the diameter of the tree trunk, then that's the characteristic. Okay, they gave an example of people, right? So what are some variables we could measure about these people who climb Mount Everest? Maybe their average age, maybe their average weights, and so on. Okay. All right. Now, every variable can fall into one of these two categories, quantitative or qualitative. Another word for qualitative, and I'd try to squeeze this in here if you can. The AP Stats book always calls it categorical. So that's the phrase I'm going to use sometimes, and I want you to be on the same page with me here. A qualitative variable is also called categorical. And I think it's a little more suitable. What category are they in? Are they male, female? Are they live in this state or that state? Okay. So by placing individuals into some category or group is a qualitative variable. Quantitative is a numerical measurement for which these operations make sense to do. Add or average them together. I can't average together states or gender or something like that. It wouldn't make sense. Okay. But maybe height or weight, that's quantitative. It makes sense to add them together or average and do those types of operations too. Okay? All right. So if you haven't already, just take a moment. And if you're not sure, hopefully you have a pencil because you should be making mistakes in math and fixing them. That's okay. But take a moment to take these variables and decide which category they go in here. All right? Pause and try that now. Okay, quantitative doesn't make sense to maybe, I think average is the better way to think about it. It makes sense to take a meaningful average of GPAs. Absolutely. That's quantitative. Points scored from a game. Yep, we can add those up and divide, from multiple games. Heights, number of speeding tickets. And that should be it for this category. Okay, now here's a tricky one. Some people put zip code here just because it's a number. If the number puts it into a category, we don't call it quantitative. For example, does it make sense to take 48423 and take another zip code, 48459, add those together and divide by 2? What would we do with that number? Absolutely nothing, right? So if a number stands for a code, then it wouldn't make sense to do this. All right, maybe even some survey said to use 0 for male and 1 for female. Well, just because we use numbers, we still wouldn't call that quantitative. It'd still be categorical or qualitative, okay? So careful of that. If a number puts you in a category, then call it categorical, okay? Any other questions about the placement on those? Okay, continuing on page 5, we still have some more terms to get through. Population data, sample data, population parameter, and sample statistic are our next learning targets. So read the rest of that while filling these in, and then we'll talk about those definitions and then do example 1. take a moment to do that now. Okay, so it does have alliteration helping us out here. So when they just tell us, a lot of times they don't put these words together. They might just say a parameter. You got to know what a parameter is. Parameter is something that describes characteristics from a population. Okay, so put those two together. Here are some examples. All right, the average GPA of every student at DHS is 2.9. Okay, if we have that data, which we can collect in the office and report that, we call that a parameter, not a statistic. Sometimes that's commonly mistaken by the average or somebody who doesn't know anything about stats. All right, those are parameters. Michael Jordan's career average points per game. That's not a stat. That is his parameter. Okay, but if it's just maybe a couple of MJ's games or one of his seasons, now we can call it a stat, okay, because it's a sample of his career. Okay, so statistic is data about a sample. Okay, 10 students from the high school instead of the entire school. Sample. Okay, so just to reinforce some of these concepts here, go ahead and read through example 1, and then we'll be ready for the next page. But most of these are kind of answered already, but it's described how you'd react to some of these questions. Go ahead. Okay, so after reading that example, we're ready to try our own. So here's a guided exercise. I'll guide you through this a little bit, but let's see what you can kind of do on your own. Read that setting. Answer the parts that you are comfortable with, and then I'll guide you through the rest. Go ahead, take 2 or 3 minutes to do it. All right, so the individuals are these 2286 adults who participated in the survey. Okay, the variable is they're measuring whether they agree or disagree with the statement that they were given. Okay. All right. Do the data comprise a sample? Yes, the data is a sample from what? What's the underlying population? It's a sample collected from the population of all U.S. adults. We just got to read carefully about what they're measuring and how they described their sample. Right? Adults aged 18 and older was their target population. Is the variable qualitative or quantitative? A yes or no, or agree or disagree is something we can't do a meaningful average for. Okay, we can measure a mode or break it down to percentages, how many agreed or disagreed, but we can't take an average. So this is qualitative or categorical. Okay, something that might be of interest, I don't know, maybe age of the people that surveyed, maybe the age range, maybe their income, ethnicity. Well, I said quantitative. So yeah, so answers are going to vary. So choose something, maybe age or income. Okay. All right. If we take that proportion, who said they agree, and make a percentage out of that, or proportion, that's based on the sample, right? The results of the sample. So sample data, statistic. Remember, the S's go together. So we'd say this is a statistic, not a parameter. The proportion is found using sample data. Okay. All right, just a couple more concepts and we'll be done with this section. So we're going to skip the levels of measurement. So we need to go to page 10 to find these last 2 terms. So I'm going to pause, let you read through page 10, fill in those definitions, and then we'll wrap it up with the discussion. Okay. Okay, so descriptive stats is basically just taking a look at data and summarizing what happened. Like, the score on the last quiz or something like that, your stats from your last game. All right, but if we're going to take the next step and draw conclusions, remember the word inference, you're probably used to seeing that word in some of your other classes. It means draw a conclusion. So if we're going to take data and draw conclusions about the population, that's called inferential statistics. Okay. All right. Now, some of your questions are going to say this question right here. What is the implied population? All right. So let's talk about that. I'm going to have you write this down here in just a moment. Let's look at what they're asking us or considering in this red text here. When you work with sample data, carefully consider the population from which they are drawn. observations and analysis of the sample are applicable to only the population from which the sample is drawn. Let's go back to this example we just dealt with. They want to know the opinion about music education in school and K through 12 in the United States. So that's who they sample. So can they take this data and apply it to Germany or Brazil? No. Okay, you can only apply your data to the implied, what you sample from, the population. All right, so if we're going to do some inferential statistics based on this and try to apply the result to a broader population, our population is limited to the United States adults. That's it. We can't apply it to other countries. All right, so when they say implied population, that's how we'd answer it on this problem. All right, we can only apply these results to adults within the United States. That's what we're limited to. All right, so I want you to write this down at the bottom. I think we got a little more room to do this. Let's write implied population. So you're used to this phrase, implied population. And I kind of just didn't define it. I gave a little example here. And write this down. So I put, if I collect a random sample of students at DHS and collect their GPA, just use that, it's an easy example to rely on, then I can only apply this data to students at DHS. Okay, not a lower performing school like Kersley or, you know, some other scum school around like that. Just kidding, just kidding. Kersley's a great school. All right, so that is the idea of implied population.